this is our first run through with 3 scenes of scene 3, with all 3 generations, I mean. This is the opposite cast to me. We did some different things in the other cast, like we didn't have music playing beforehand, but I'm going to talk through some of the direction in this cast, and some things that I think they did well and some things that I think they could improve on, and why I think they did certain things and why I think Chip directed certain things in this cast. Because this is our first run through, there are quite a few different videos that I'm going to have to click onto, and quite a few mistakes or stopping and starting to give direction. So let's just start. So this isn't right at the beginning of the scene. Right at the beginning of the scene is between Bonnie and Joe, sorry. I'm playing Joe, so I'm doing whatever Maya's doing here. And I think it was good to have 2 different casts, to also watch their direction and to watch how Maya was playing Joe, and to see how I could change my performance based to what Chip wanted, and how to suit the character of Joe. When I get to know Joe better, then I think it'll be easier to play her, because right now we're all concentrating on the lines so much, because this is our first run through. Anyway. So right now the 3 scenes are happening simultaneously. Anna taking heroin, the interaction between Toby and Carol, and the first meeting of Joe and Bonnie. The lines from first off, we found it quite hard to follow, and I find myself concentrating really hard to listen to my cues, and so my acting felt harder and the whole thing felt a lot harder. But I think the movements that we were given would help us remember the cues and lines a lot more, because there was a sort of rhythm or flow to them, and perhaps the music in the background as well. So I think that this interaction is quite interesting at this point, and I think they did it really well, because Maya did it really well, and Hannah as well. The interaction between them both is supposed to sort of show this sort of slight attraction, this like flirtatious sort of feeling, and I think it is showing that, but because there is this split sort of perception as an audience, you've got to look at all 3. We find it quite hard to sort of notice that right now, which I think we need to work on more, perhaps more of a subtle look, and showing more pain of the fish hook, potentially, but I think it's working well. I think the way that the stage is set out is quite interesting, because each different generation gap shows contrast. So here they're both standing up, here on the ground, and here sitting or crouching, so that shows contrast immediately. And because obviously as the audience doesn't know yet that all 3 are related, so it sort of brings these 3 it sort of introduces them as 3 sort of random pieces on their own, but obviously because they're in one play, that they're going to link somehow. So I think as we look through the play more and we investigate more of these characters and how they link, then we could change up the different layouts, different set on each generation gap in each scene, and I think it'll be something interesting to see what Mr. Chip does for all the different scenes. But I think this one's quite interesting to show contrast as a beginning part of this play.
Or a Friday night, or even a Thursday night. Yeah. Thought so.
Yeah. Let's make them much more definite.
Okay, so that's a bit of Chip's directions. So there were a lot of simultaneous lines in this scene. we looked at the simultaneous lines, and there's some yeps that happen simultaneously across the board, 2 of them, and I think that Alice Birch tried to show these things in unison to make sure the audience got used to the idea that the play was gonna the lines in the play was going to happen like this throughout the whole thing, with 3 scenes going on at the same time. And I think that it had more of a powerful effect when the words were said at the same time, maybe more of a deeper meaning behind them. And it's sort of, you know, if an audience member is particularly watching one side, then the yeps, the things that are said in unison, so in this example, it'll bring the audience attention back to the centre, or sort of to somewhere else that they weren't looking at before. So I think that's why it's important for us to make sure that we get those done so that they're in unison. Yeah.
Do you want me to say, I guess, it is,
Give them that cue line.
or even a Thursday? Yeah, thought so.
So then we managed to do it.
It's deep. You feel it too.
They're not at the same time. So it's sorry, right?
So this piece of acting over here, it's supposed to be like an exchange of a cigarette and pouring of a drink. This in itself was actually written in the play, whereas the stuff happening here was also written in the play, but in not so much detail. So Mr. Chip has told us to go and figure out a medical routine that we need to explore later on. And I think that'll help us with our lines as well. And I think it'll mean that and set the main part for Bonnie's character, because obviously it's Carol, Anna and Bonnie as the 3 main characters, so it will show how they the personalities of them both, because we've already had scene 1 with Carol and scene 2 with mainly Anna, so scene 3 should be mainly Bonnie, the understanding of Bonnie to the audience. So this is just some of the direction that was given.
It's literally like a beat longer. She said.
So this is talking about all of the timing of the lines and how that was important at this point. So looking at
Well, he says sorry at the same time.
looking at this was quite difficult, but it had to be perfectly timed to make sense, because we found that when it wasn't timed right, it didn't really make sense, or when lines were said over each other, then things were missed and attention was drawn to the wrong places. But I think for this first run through, it was quite a good run through, and I think you could make sense for quite a lot of it.
And then I say it afterwards. I guess I'm going to change that. So just
So for the next,
You choose to say sorry simultaneously. Okay. Does that affect things up?
so for the next section, we carried on. So this video.
it was
Don't go back to.
So, in these long pauses when we were waiting for the other scenes to happen, and as you could see from this scene, it sort of looks frozen, and I think that we need to sort of figure out a way to make these pauses not look like we're frozen, or pick up the pace a little bit, because when the other scenes are going on, you can tell that they're waiting for the cue lines or waiting for their part to be said. And so I think that we need to work on that, or figure out a way to make it look like it's natural, because this play is very Stanislavski themed in the way that the acting is all naturalistic and it's not abstract, and it's like real life scenes, but because it's 3 scenes going on at the same time, it's also abstract and splits the audience point of view to more of a Brecht style, because of the way that the play is set out. But if it was any individual scene generation on its own, then it would be very Stanislavski styled. So I think it can't afford to have these awkward pauses where it looks like it's frozen. So I think that's something that we're going to have to work on.
She totally stopped because she's saying that there's some kind of sexual
some of Chip's direction for the Bonnie and Joe scene, when to show Bonnie's character out more, Chip is saying that she should step back more and be more concerned because of the security between doctor and patient relationships. When Joe is trying to have a joke, Bonnie doesn't understand this because we're trying to understand and get into Bonnie's character a bit more, so he's telling her to back away and be more worried, and not worried like in an emotional way, but in a physical way and through the job. So he's telling her to back away when Joe's joking.
Do you not get that?
Yeah,
sort of
doctor patient.
Yeah.
But at what point are you allowed to lie on drugs? That was the only reason I wanted to become a doctor.
Literally almost like. Right, try it please. Let's go for the multiple sorry, and I want to see how that line exchange works out. Okay.
So this was just us rerunning that little section.
Sorry? It was a...
So they changed the lines a little bit here to have the sorry simultaneous. I think this worked so much better, and you could hear what Joe was saying, Maya was saying when she was saying it was a joke. The reaction was much better, and I think it drew your attention in certain places that it should have been, because there's quite a weird interaction going on over here, because this is Carol's so John's brother-in-law, so her husband in her brother-in-law, not related, blood related. So but this sort of interaction is quite sort of creepy over here, and the sorry is a bit like awkward, and here is a little bit awkward as well because of the patient doctor relationships going on,
I was joking. Is there a problem?
and it sets out the tone of the play.
It was a joke. Okay. I was joking. You'll have to wait, but if you'd rather somebody else. It was just a joke. Okay. Okay.
I think this was done really effectively, and I think for our first time it was really good. Chip's directions definitely helped the play, helped this scene, and I think if we continue to have extra bits like this, it'll make it work really well. If I carry on to later on in the play, in the scenes that we were doing, this scene that we're doing, the scene 3.
Yes. Fuck. Hold still.
In this section of the play, in the scene, we kept having lines that were overlapping, and this proved quite difficult because a lot of the child's lines were overlapping with Joe's lines, Anna as Daisy as a child, and it was hard to to make sense of the play when watching it, and I think it was hard to act it as well. So I think we need to have more gaps in between and maybe change it out so that even when it says that lines were overlapped, don't always have them overlap fully, or have one section a bit louder than the other so the audience can make sense of it. Because from this first scene, you can see how an audience might not understand exactly what's going on and all the character interaction.
Which one is it? Which present? Your Uncle John's on the table. It's the one with the green ribbon on it. Quite a small one then. Yes. It's not tight, is it? Well, probably won't be next time, by the way.
So the really long gaps show how, again, as I've said before, this wasn't done very well because it was our first time, but the long gaps and the waiting around, it sort of makes it awkward, and instead of drawing your attention to one certain part, you're waiting. You have to be able to look at all three, and if you can see that one looks frozen or awkward, then it draws your attention even when you shouldn't be drawn to that area.
That doesn't seem like an appropriate present for a child. That's what I said. What I do. Young boy.
we were really specific about wanting the lines to be said in the right order, because if you didn't, then it would mess it all up. So in this process, when we were still learning the lines, working through this initial scene in this lesson, we'd found that if you get one line off, it makes it really difficult to continue, because people don't have their cues. So it was hard for us from that point of view, especially. I'm going to skip to the end of this scene and our final bits. I think this was when we recapped a bit in the final part of scene 3.
Sorry. Are you happy? Hello? Hello? Best not to look. I'm going to say 23.
So we spent at least 2-3 hours on this scene trying to perfect it and the timing of the lines.
Hello. Are you though? Happy? Is that a cigarette? Yes. Can I have one?
I think this is a lot more effective, and you can see, because this doesn't look as awkward, it looks like the awkwardness that it should be, as if it was being acted in real life, not awkward like waiting for a line or a scene, so or a cue. So you can see that we'd rehearsed it well, even just in this last couple of hours that we'd spent on it, in our first couple of lessons on it. You can also tell that it's a lot more effective because you can understand it more, it's a lot clearer. And I think that this as well worked because we slowed the pace down, and it made it more understandable, doesn't need to be rushed to make sense or to be watchable. I think the slower it was, the easier it was to understand, as long as it wasn't really slow or there wasn't massive gaps. Yeah.
She absolutely won't mind. No. I didn't even catch anything. It's my birthday today. Not one fish. Happy birthday, Daisy. Maybe next time. Did you bring me a present? Yes. Thank you. You're welcome. Maybe there won't be next time. Give me a very hand.
You can still see though how we sort of hesitate to speak over each other because it doesn't feel natural. So I think we need to get more used to doing that, because that's throughout the whole play. But during this scene especially, I think we got the interactions and the characterisation down a lot. I learnt a lot about Jo and my own character through Maya's acting of her. I thought she was quite a bubbly, quite a confident sort of character, as I'd spoken about when we first looked at the script itself. But when actually playing her and alongside the other scenes going on, you sort of find that she has to be a little bit more outgoing or make it a little bit more awkward, and because of the long gaps and because of speaking over each other, you have to be a bit more so. And I think that just added to Jo's character, and I think I'm going to help build on this more and have more of an understanding of her, so when I go back to actually reenacting the scenes, and then when we build up to our final performance, it'll help me think about more how to play her and any sort of physical things she might show.
Yes. Fuck. Still. Very nice. Which one is it? Which present? Your Uncle John put it on the table. It's the one with the green ribbon on it.
Just going to skip to...
Hold still. You have OKs after all. Okay. I think this was his name. Okay. That doesn't seem like an appropriate present for a child. That's what I do. I swear I'm straight after her. Yeah, because I have a young woman to say. Oh, yeah.
I'm going to let you get a break. I was hoping...
Okay, so this was that run through of our first ever part of scene 3. We didn't manage to get through all of it, but I think it was pretty good, and I think it helped build our understanding of our characters and what my initial ideas were from reading the script and the class read through, and so I think it was quite well.